Staff notices Army man crying inside the airport and decide to take matters into their own hands. The moments of happiness are what we live for. Every minor as well as major moment of happiness counts. But how do you feel about the uncertainty of whether you'll be able to experience one of the biggest pieces of happiness of your life? Soldiers of the country are the people who are always uncertain about not just the happiness of their lives, but their lives themselves. Their sacrifices cannot be quantified. One day you're home, the next day you're in a battlefield. One such soldier is Brooks Lindsay, the protagonist of our story. The biggest happiness of his life is announced, but will he be able to witness it? While the whole world sees him troubled and emotionally sitting dressed in his uniform on the floor of a Texas airport. Brooks Lindsay, 25, is an Army soldier of the 114th Field Artillery Regiment, 2nd Battalion of the Mississippi National Guard. To be an Army soldier was Brooks's childhood dream, and he had been a very emotional person since his childhood. His hometown is Jackson, Mississippi. Brooks met Haley Wilson, the love of his life, in 2015. The moment they met, they knew they were made for each other and nothing has moved them apart. Their love increased with each passing day, and in November 2017, they tied the knot to stay together forever. Soon after the wedding, the Lindsays hadn't expected that they would get another piece of great news. The news of Haley being pregnant broke out very unexpectedly, and the couple had no idea about it. They couldn't believe it that they would be holding their firstborn in their hands in just a short time span of 9 months. Right after the news of Haley's pregnancy was announced, the newlywed couple started baby classes and their trips to the hospital for regular health checkups of the to-be mother and the baby. It was one of these trips that the couple got the extraordinary news that they would be having a girl. After the elongated celebrations, it was now time for Brooks to go back and fulfill his ambitions. Duty called and he had to leave with a heavy heart. Haley was prepared for this since the very beginning, since she knew what the Army meant for Brooks. But both of them had a little hope of being together for the birth of their firstborn. Since Brooks and Haley were not sure if the father would be able to make it to the birth of the baby, they decided on a name for the baby together. Before Brooks left for the service, they settled on a very cute name for their baby girl and named her Millie. It was finally time for the couple to part their ways because duty always comes first for a soldier. Bags had been packed, but hopes were still high for the two, for Brooks to somehow make it home for the birth of the baby. And Brooks bid adieu to 7-month pregnant Haley. The Red Cross doesn't permit soldiers any kind of leave if the mother and unborn baby are in perfect health condition. Brooks and I have been practicing my call to the Red Cross because we heard it was really hard to get men home for births, and we were told the only way it would actually work is if I was in distress, Haley said. However, little did the Lindsays know what fate was in store for them. After Brooks had left for his duty, Haley went for routine checkups on her own. All seemed perfectly fine for the mother and child. The doctor said that they were both healthy and there was no problem. But was that really the case, or was the doctor missing something? When it was established that Haley was doing fine with the baby, it was also confirmed that she would not be able to have Brooks along with her at the time of giving birth to their child. Both of them had now lost all hope and were just trying to move forward from this fact. Haley's feelings were perplexing in themselves. On one side, she was happy and satisfied that she and the unborn baby were perfectly healthy and doing just fine. But on the other side, she wasn't able to digest the fact that her husband wouldn't be able to make it for the delivery of the baby. But was the doctor sure about the health of the mother? When Haley and Brooks were finally trying to make peace with the fact that they wouldn't be able to be together for the birth of their child, a piece of unexpected news came in. Haley went to the doctor just like any other day, but little did she know that it was going to be a drastically unusual day for her. After Haley came back home from her regular appointment with a doctor, she got a call from the doctor, which was not good news. The doctor had called to inform Haley that she had developed a case of preeclampsia, wherein the blood pressure of the mother would keep on increasing until the child is born, and her condition would affect the other organs of her body too. So something had to be done urgently. Haley said that after returning from the hospital, "I received a call from my doctor that my blood pressures were too high and the baby was being stressed. She told me to be at the hospital in an hour so they would go ahead and induce." She called up Brooks and told him the whole scenario and how the delivery date was now earlier. As soon as Haley and Brooks heard of the preponed delivery, the hope that Brooks would be coming home sparked in them. Now that Haley was facing complications in her delivery, there was a possibility that the Red Cross would allow a few days to Brooks. Haley reached out to the Red Cross to talk about her situation. After cross-checking the medical conditions of Haley's case with a hospital, the Red Cross granted a 4-day leave to Brooks. He would finally come home. But neither of the parents-to-be were aware that they were soon going to experience the best as well as the worst days of their life. As soon as the leave was approved, Brooks booked his flight to be with his wife and their baby. From his home base at Fort Bliss near El Paso, he had a flight from Dallas, from where he would have to interchange for Jackson. He was so excited to head back to his hometown, but Destiny had other plans. Destiny seemed to be confused on Brooks. It was still unclear whether Brooks would be there to witness the birth of his child or not. He was going to be there, but also then wasn't. He'd finally gotten a flight to Jackson the next morning, but it was delayed, so he decided to stay at the airport. During all the confusion, Haley was admitted to the hospital for delivery. Her water broke at 10 a.m. in the morning, which meant that baby Millie could come into this world at any moment. "Friday morning, my water was broken at 7 a.m., and pitocin, a drug often used in births, began," Haley said later. But where was the father? Brooks had landed in Dallas at 2 p.m. He was at the airport and the flight to Jackson was delayed. Haley was already in the hospital, but Brooks was still 402 miles away from his wife and baby. "I was sure that we would already have a baby by then, but at least he gets to come home for 4 days, so I was taking whatever I could get," Haley recalled. After hours of delay of Brooks's flight, there was no ray of hope at all of his reaching the hospital. Haley waited in pain till 5 p.m. for her husband, but she could not bear it any longer. The time had come and she had reached the last stage of labor without any chance of Brooks's arrival. The couple had zero expectations of being together now, and Haley changed the names of the people who would be present with her at the time of her delivery at the last minute. She had listed her husband very happily, but now she had to change the name to her mother-in-law and her stepmother. Brooks, on the other hand, would have to miss the most beautiful moment of his life. Or did God have something else in mind? The whole family tried to put in efforts to do something about the expecting couple's situation, but there was no solution available. No video recording or photography was allowed inside the hospital room, so even that option seemed futile for Brooks to see the birth of his child. But Brooks's mother, Teresa, knew what importance the birth of a child holds in the lives of the parents, and she was adamant on doing something for her son to see his baby girl come to life. She made a plan and was smart enough to act on it, even when the authorities were against it. Teresa FaceTimed Brooks, and since video recording or photography was prohibited in the hospital, she did not openly video call her son in front of the doctor. She hid her phone with her hands, awkwardly positioning it in front of her shirt. But the doctor soon noticed that something was fishy in Teresa's behavior and confronted her. Lindsay's family doctor had understood the family's situation when they explained it to her, and therefore she allowed Teresa to video call her son. It was unbelievable for Brooks that he would finally be able to be part of the process of his daughter's delivery. But things really did not seem to be in Brooks's favor that day. When he had finally been able to find a way to be with his soon-to-be-born daughter and wife, the flight that was delayed for so many hours suddenly had cleared up and was ready to board the passengers. Brooks knew that if he would board the flight, he wouldn't be able to be beside his wife even virtually and would have to spend the time on his flight in ignorance. And so he did not want to leave the airport and disconnect the call that had kept him connected to his wife. While Brooks was watching his wife giving birth to their daughter, his eyes were glued to the phone screen and he didn't care about the world. His name was announced several times for the boarding procedure, but he was not bothered and ignored it all. Haley recalled, "Brooks was telling me it was okay, and I was doing so good, and I heard him wincing and saying wow through my pushes." But just as Brooks moved his eyes a little upwards, he saw the airport authorities walking towards him. They wondered what Brooks was up to and pushed him on board the flight. Finally, Brooks was left with no other option but to board the flight. Just when he was so close to seeing his baby girl come to life, he would have to disconnect from his family and be on the flight where it would be impossible for him to know if his wife and daughter were even okay or not. Brooks was in a shattered state of mind and heart and had too much pressure on him, but he soon discovered he wasn't alone with this. While he'd been on the phone, his fellow passengers had noticed him and figured out what was going on. Each passenger that knew of Brooks' condition tried to delay the flights as much as they could on their part and support him so that he could be on the call for just a little longer and witness the birth of his daughter. Just as a soldier is there for his countrymen, today the people were there for him. When no more delaying was possible by the passengers and the authorities had finally decided to board, Brooks had no option left. Just when he was about to press the end call button, he and in fact the whole airport heard a scream from the other side of the call that shouted, "Don't let him board the flight!" And right after the scream, Brooks was numb when he witnessed the magical moment of his daughter coming into the world. He had tears flowing down, and with the widest of smiles he was lost in a world of his own when he saw his baby girl for the first time. Millie, Fritz, and Lindsay entered this world at exactly 5:23 p.m., minutes before gates of her father's flight home were going to be closed. And it was not just the Lindsay family that welcomed Millie. The whole airport had been witnessing her birth and cheered and welcomed the baby. It was not Brooks or Haley alone, but one big family of all the passengers at the airport that were delighted by the baby's birth. They were all together for the brave soldier who was alone at the airport at such a precious occasion. Finally, when Brooks had seen that his wife and the newborn baby were healthy and fine, he boarded his flight on his way back home to Jackson. It was filled with emotions of happiness, blessings, and excitement of holding his newborn in his arms after seeing her for the first time. Brooks finally arrived home to his wife Haley and their newborn Millie at 7:20 p.m., and Haley asked all 17 people present in the hospital room to leave. She wanted the moment to be her husband's and their daughters alone. After a roller coaster ride of a day, Brooks finally saw his baby girl in awe and celebrated the moment of taking her in his arms. "I held my daughter for the first time and I hugged and kissed my wife," Brooks said later. It was emotional, especially not being there for the actual birth, to get to see her and hold her for the first time. The 4 heavenly days for Haley and Brooks had to come to an end very soon, and so they did. There was a point where they weren't even sure if they could be together for the birth of their child, and now that that had been achieved, they accepted the 4 days that they had gotten with generosity.